All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in darkest night. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. I have lived in the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God.
All right, it's time for Children's Church. So the kids will make their way. They're preparing for a Christmas program on December 17th. That's going to be here before you know it, and we're so excited about that and appreciate everybody who's working to make that happen very much. It's going to be a good day. It always is. All right. Well, it's good to see you here today. We are in Isaiah chapter 5 this morning. It's our text as we continue a series on reconnecting with God. And I think that is always going to be a pertinent topic for us because our spiritual life is never a straight and unyielding path. It's always up and down, and some days we feel really strong, and some days we feel like we're barely hanging on, and some days we wonder if we did hang on. And so we always have to reconnect with God. And it's crucial for us because we often make the kind of choices that end up moving us farther away from God rather than closer to Him. And so we've been talking about this month some images and some messages. So we started off with Elijah, and the image there was fires. He called down fire on Mount Carmel, and the message there was He reigns. God is the one who reigns above all. And then last week we talked about Hosea, and the image was an infant, a father who reaches down and feeds and cares for an infant. And that message was called He Calls. And so He reigns, He calls. And today we're in Isaiah, and the image is a vineyard. And we're going to focus on how God provides. And so we think about Isaiah. Isaiah is a book that belongs to the major prophets. If you were reading through the Bible this year, you've already done Isaiah, all 66 chapters. And you were wondering, is there an end to this book? It is a large book. It's known for many prophecies about Jesus and many of them are quoted in the New Testament. And Isaiah's prophecy begins in the year that King Uzziah died. And Uzziah was one of Judah's better kings, although he didn't finish well. He finished with sort of a bad event. He entered into the temple and he burned incense, and only the priests were supposed to do that. And so when he was confronted by the priests, instead of repenting, he got angry, and the Lord struck him with leprosy, and he lived out his days alone, having to stay away from other people. And so this is the time frame that Isaiah does. And an interesting thing to me about Isaiah is God told him up front, this ministry is not going to be some successful thing that a lot of people are going to respond to. In fact, it's going to be kind of the opposite. And so he said that he was to proclaim God's message until the cities lie ruined without inhabitant, and the fields are ruined and ravaged in Isaiah chapter 6. And the population would go into exile. And so in this bad news that because of Israel's unfaithfulness, there's a glimmer of hope. And there always is. If you look in the prophets, there's this message that when you turn away from God, nothing good's going to come of that. That's going to bring about disaster in your life. But the door is open. Come back home. And there's always hope for future with God, a time when there'll be peace and justice and righteousness. And so that's kind of the flavor of Isaiah. And Isaiah 5 is kind of a song. It's a parable told in the form of a song, a reminder of the things that we want most in life are provided by our Heavenly Father. And the problem is we keep looking for it in other places. God provides everything that we need, and then we spend our whole life trying to find it somewhere else. It's that old country song, looking for love in all the wrong places. And that's the way we are with God sometimes. We're looking for God and looking for what He offers in all the wrong places. And so this song of the vineyard is a distinctive plea for us to be aware of our need to be focused on what God provides. And so that's why we're talking today about God provides. Let's read this song, this parable, however you want to characterize it, about the vineyard and think about it for a few minutes. So Isaiah says, I will sing for the one I love a song about his vineyard. My loved one has a vineyard on a fertile hillside. And he dug it up and he cleared it of stones and planted it with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it, and he cut out a winepress as well. And then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. Now you dwellers in Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done for my vineyard than I've done for it? And when I looked for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? Now I will tell you that what I'm going to do in my vineyard, I will take away its hedge, it'll be destroyed, I'll break down its wall, and it'll be trampled, and I'll make it a wasteland. Neither pruned nor cultivated, and briars and thorns will grow here, and I will command the clouds not to rain on it. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah are the vines that He delighted in. And He looked for justice, but He saw bloodshed. He looked for righteousness, but He heard cries of distress. It starts off so well, this song, about the vineyard. And so I want us to think about how God provided the perfect vineyard. He had a provision of the perfect vineyard. And this vineyard is a symbol of wealth, and it's a symbol of blessing. It's a symbol of God's presence and how God has blessed His people. And I want you to notice the way that God prepared His vineyard in such detail. And notice he said how he cleared off the land, how he planted the choicest vines, how he built a hedge and a tower. And he did all of this so that it would be a perfect location, the perfect vineyard, meticulous plans. And this is a way that God always dealt with Israel throughout the Old Testament. We can remember, as we've talked about before, how God rescued Israel from slavery in Egypt. And from the beginning, he led them by day with a pillar of what? A cloud, and at night a pillar of fire. And so he was before them and after them, and he led them exactly where he wanted them to go. He turned bitter waters to sweet at Marah. He provided manna and quail to sustain them when they were hungry. He rescued them from people who would harm them. He led them to the holy mountain and shared his will for living with him. And in all of this, what we see is God continuing to pour out his grace, his mercy, his forgiveness, his strength, his hope, doing everything he can to build this vineyard up, to make it a perfect and beautiful vineyard. And the problem is that over and over again, Israel just continued to reject him, to hand it back to him. No matter how detailed the plans were that he put into place, the vineyard failed to produce what God intended for it, because people just kept looking for what they wanted somewhere else, not realizing God had provided everything they needed. Somebody wrote that the good grapes God expected would be mercy and love and stewardship of time and talents. Instead, God saw the sour grapes of selfishness and corruption and wickedness. And I think that leads to the haunting question, the whole point, and what I kept coming back to as I studied and prepared for this message, is that question that says, what more can I do? And I think about that. What more could God have done? You know, how much more could he have provided? How much of his presence? How much of his taking care of them? And so I think that God's provision is of the perfect opportunity, that God gave them everything they needed. They had everything they could need to be the people of God and to provide the kind of living that God expected and wanted for them. And the truth is, that's our dilemma today. That God has invested in each one of us the same kind of meticulous care and love, and he did this all to rescue us from ourselves, from our own sin. And he did it all so that we would have the perfect opportunity to be his people, to be a vineyard, to be a place where there's prosperity in the sense of peace and forgiveness and a life that glorifies and honors him. He rescued us from the guilt and penalty of our own sin. We just had in our time of communion a reminder of what God had done, what he went through in order to provide for us. The cleansing power of the blood of Jesus. He came to rescue us from our own choices and consequences. The truth is, if we look at our life, a lot of the things that have happened to us, and a lot of things that are difficult for us, came at our own hands because we were looking for something that God had already provided. He rescued us from the power of evil and of Satan. He's victorious over Satan. He rescued us from fear and temptation and loneliness. He's always with us. His presence is there. And he's shown us how to live as we face our enemies and face our struggles and face our illnesses and so much more. God's given us everything. And yet we struggle to keep him at the first place of our life. And when I consider the cross and what Jesus has done for us, that we couldn't do for ourselves, I wonder, what more could God do? What more do you want God to provide? How much more? What else is there? In 2 Peter 1 and verse 3, it says, his divine power has given us everything required for life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. And so we don't have a lack of ability to live a fruitful life. It's within your hands. It's within your choice. It's within receiving what God has to give us. You have Christ who is in you and with you. And we think about that sometimes, what a wonderful blessing it is to know that wherever I walk, Christ walks with me. His Spirit lives within me. God is aware of every time I wake up in the morning and every time I lay my head down at night. He walks with me through every storm, through every good time, in every experience of life. I'm never walking alone. Christ is with me. And we have each other united in bringing Christ to the world. We have brothers and sisters in this room that we can call on in times of struggle and heartache and hurt. And we have people who will surround us and help us. We have wealth in our country, and I know that sometimes we don't always feel wealthy, especially when you go to the grocery store these days, but you don't feel wealthy, but you have a roof over your head. You have some food on your table. You have the ability to earn and to sustain. You have a community filled with people who need to know God, and we have purpose and meaning because we have the gospel message to bring out. We have scriptures full of encouragement and information that we need for life. We have Spirit-given talents to glorify God by using the gifts that He has given us to serve and to love. We live in God's vineyard today. How are we going to respond? Are we going to be like the people in this song who looked at the beautiful work that God had done, all of the things that God had accomplished, and instead turn our back on Him and go look for it somewhere else? So we have a provision of a fruitful life, because when we follow God's will for our life, the fruit that is produced will honor Him. It's not to honor us. When we do good things and we try to love other people and serve other people and we can see that there's good things happening, it's not so that we can say, look what we did. It's so we can say, look what God did through us. And this idea of the vineyard is something the Bible uses throughout. Jesus told a story about a vineyard, told a parable about a vineyard. And then Paul uses that imagery in Philippians chapter 1 and verse 11 when he talks about the fruit of your salvation. May you always be filled with the fruit of your salvation, the righteous character produced in your life by Jesus Christ. This will bring much glory and praise to God. And so we have this fruit, and when I think about fruit, maybe we should use the word results. It's not as vivid a picture, but I want us to understand when we talk about fruit, we're talking about this is what happens when we live in the vineyard. This is what happens when we live in God's will. And here he talks about the fruit of our salvation. In Galatians 5, Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's what God is trying to produce within us. We ought to look at that verse once a week at least and say, God, what are you trying to do in my life, in my heart? Who are you making me into? Well, there it is. That's the fruit, the results of the Spirit of God living in you. As you yield to Him, this is who you will become. Jesus said in John 15 and verse 4, remain in me as I remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. And neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. And apart from me, you can do nothing. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. And so I think about how God has prepared this vineyard, how He's given us so much, given us everything that we need for life and righteousness and godliness, how He has given us of His Son, how He has provided for us all of the basics of a spiritual life. And when God looks down in His vineyard, does He see people who are living up to His expectations? I want to give you two ways that we can cultivate a good vineyard in our life using this same imagery. And one is to be attentive to those who struggle around you. He said, I looked for justice, but I saw bloodshed. I looked for righteousness, but I heard cries of distress. God says, I'm looking down into this vineyard, and I want to see people who care for other people, who are ministering to the strugglers, who are available to help and bless those who are having a hard time making it. And in the Isaiah 5 passage, he said, I don't see that. I see all of this difficulty and struggle and hardship continuing on, and they're not paying attention to it. But injustice and unrighteousness exist in the world around us. Pain is real. Hurtful circumstances bring suffering. Your job as a person who's a part of the vineyard of God is to bring light and hope and joy in the darkness of this world that's crushing people. To let them know what we have, what we've been blessed with, so they can have the same blessing. It's not just ours to keep, it's ours to share. And so be attentive to those around us. How can I be light in that darkness? Well, I want to think about just a couple things for a second. And one of the things is I want to think about that in terms of as a church. How can we as a church be a light in the darkness of this world? And I think part of it is just being a benevolent group of people who look for ways to help and bless others. One of the ways that we do that is through our monthly collections. We join in with other helping agencies in the parish, and we try to help them help others. There's no need to reinvent the wheel, you know. And what we've got to do is reach out and try to help. So we have a collection. This month is for Grace Place, and we're helping with, I don't have the list is in the bulletin, but I think it's like toiletries and soap and maybe even some food, and we'll take that to Grace Place. I don't know if you've been there, but I've been there around a meal time, and there are people who are gathered who are hungry and who are struggling in their life, and the people who put that on they're a conduit of supplies and encouragement and blessing and food to people who really need it. We can't reinvent the wheel and do that ourselves all the time, but we can help somebody else be a help. And so last month we gave to the food bank. And I tell you, when years ago, people coming by the church looking for food was common. We used to keep a pantry, you remember that? And the kids at Sunday school would bring canned goods and we'd collect them and everything. And it became a time when that stuff just sat there and nobody was ever asking for it. I think that's a testimony to the effectiveness of the food bank here in our parish. And so there are distribution points all over the place, and people are being fed, and we contribute to that through our collections. Maybe it's for the women's shelter. Maybe it's this month. Another month it's going to be for Two Penny Missions, or maybe another month it's going to be for something else. Paul McComas oversees that work. And I'm just thinking about that we don't always see where that goes or how that happens. But one area that we do see it is in Meals on Wheels. About 6 times a year, I think, and David Burkett and Shannon are over that and trying to make that work. And I love what Shannon said. I don't want to embarrass her, but I love what Shannon said one time. She said, when we're preparing food, we should think of this as if we're preparing this for Jesus. He said, if you help one of these, the least of these, you've done it for me. And so when people gather and they box up this food and they drive all over the parish, I did that one time. I crossed paths with myself about 20 times. I'm not good at that part. But you walk up to a door and you bring somebody food that's maybe the only food they're going to get that day. Man, if you can't be moved by that, you need to look at your heart. And this is a way that as a church we try to be light in the dark world that's around us. And there's a lot of other things that go on around here, but there's so many things. But we need to also think about being a light individually by daily offering care and concern and compassion and kindness to people we know are struggling in their life. Even if it's just a kind word. Have you ever been having a draggy day and then somebody smiles and just says a kind word? And that's it. That's what you needed. You just need to be seen. That somebody saw you and somebody was willing to smile and offer a blessing. And I'm just saying that when we talk about life in the vineyard and being attentive to those who struggle around us, it sounds so big, and we can't fix everything. We can't make every life, we can't get involved in people's lives and make it better ourselves. But what we can do is introduce them to a Heavenly Father who cares and loves and who will get involved in their life and bring light into the darkness. And so I think we need to be attentive. This is how we cultivate a good vineyard. This is what God was looking for. He's looking for justice and righteousness. He's looking for us to take up and speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves. And I think another way we cultivate a good vineyard is to be attentive to the need for Jesus in a world around you. We can feed every hungry person, but somewhere along the way, that hungry person needs to know about Jesus, who will fill them and save them and encourage them and give them hope and a heavenly home that's awaiting us. There's a song that was, sometimes how a song just pops in your head, and sometimes it's actually a good one that you should sing. Sometimes it's just an old country song that we shouldn't sing. But this morning, the song that popped in my head is "How Beautiful Heaven Must Be." You remember singing that song? What a beautiful song. So, of course, I went right to YouTube and found 5 or 6 different versions of it. And I found an a cappella bluegrassy one. I said, I bet some people would hate this, but I love it. And how beautiful heaven must be. That's what I want for everybody that I meet, for them to know Jesus. And to know that when this life is over, that's not the end. There's the promise and hope of heaven and reunion. I want the whole world to know. So how can I bring the light of Christ into my world? There's probably 1,000 ways, but I want you to pray about it and think about it. Sometimes I think we're guilty of neglecting the presence of Christ. We're just busy doing our life, doing the life things that have to be accomplished. And we forget along the way that what I'm trying to do is bring Jesus into this picture, because he's here, and I need to remember that and acknowledge it. Be attentive to the need for Jesus in the world around you. When you see people who are acting rudely, and people who are acting out, and people who are struggling, people who are hurting, remember that person needs Jesus. And I don't know how I'm going to do that. I don't know how I'm going to say it. I don't know how I'm going to bring it up. I don't know how I'm going but however I can, I want to bring Jesus into the picture. See, because God has given us everything we need to live the life that honors Him and to reach the hurting people around us. And what that tells me, and when I read this song from the Vineyard, it reminds me that God is intimately concerned about His people. He is very concerned, not just in a generic sort of sense. God loves the whole world. Yes, He does, but He loves you. If you read verse 17 about, Jesus didn't come, in John 3:17, Jesus didn't just come to the world to save the world, but he also didn't come to condemn the world, but to save the world. And so many people see Jesus and church and as condemning. And He said, I didn't come to condemn, I came to save. He cares about His people. God is observant about how we live our life. He's watching. He's aware. He knows. He's not only observant, but He has feelings about how we live our life. He reacts and He watches as we live our life. He reacts. We have a living relationship with the living God all day long. It's not just for Sunday morning. Not just when we show up on Wednesday night. It's for all day long, every day. We get up with the Lord and we lie down at night, and as we sleep with the Lord. We're always in the presence of the Lord. And sometimes we just forget that. And this should encourage us to remain focused on living out His purpose. And the ultimate answer of God to all of our needs is Jesus. You flip over to Isaiah chapter 11. It's a prophecy, and one of many prophecies about Jesus. It says, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. The Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of the knowledge and the fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears, But with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth and the breath of his lips. He will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. What an amazing prophecy about what Jesus came to do and who he came to be. This justice and righteousness theme runs all the way through the prophets. And God moved to relieve the world of sin by sending Jesus. And if you look at the life of Jesus, righteousness and justice define the way that he lived his life. And he calls us to the same. So what steps do you need to take today to live and draw closer to the Jesus life? The life that looks out and cares, the life that brings salvation to those around. I think we always need to think about reconnecting with God. He reigns, he calls, he provides. And I guess when we think about this passage, and I go back to that question, what more can I do? I think the other flip side of that question is how much are we, what are we willing to do to receive what God has given us? And maybe that provision today for you is to decide, I want to give my life to Christ. I want to turn away from the sin in my life. And one of those first steps that we'll need to take after acknowledging who God is to us and who Jesus is to us is to be baptized. Maybe somebody would like to be baptized today or ask for prayer. And that's why we sing an invitation song. And that's a good opportunity, isn't it? When this moment we're singing that song, if you want to respond to the gospel, you certainly can. But don't think that the end of the invitation song is the end of the invitation. As long as we're here and this world is turning, and one day it won't be. One day everything will change. The Lord will come back. But until then, as long as we're here, the invitation's open. God's got the door open. He's got his arms open. And he's provided for you everything you need to live a life in the vineyard, a life that honors him and a life that serves and loves others. He provided all that for you. Will we receive it? We're going to stand and pray, and then we'll sing that invitation song. God, thank you so much for this passage. It reminds, they reject that. What else is there? So during this song, I pray that we'll kind of look in our own heart and say, what have I done to accept what the Father has given to us so generously, so beautifully, so gracefully? And we know, Father, that to reject you is to reject any hope that we have for eternal life. There's a kindness and a severity to you, as Apostle Paul said. But the kindness is what draws us to you. Draw us now, Father. Draw each of us as we look in our life. Draw us close to you. And help us to see what's lacking in our life. Where do we need to cultivate a vineyard such as you've given?